So you want to get into Shakespeare, or at least you think it would be a nice idea to get into him. After all, shouldn't we read the famous bard? Or maybe you want to try and get the best out of Shakespeare because you're doing exams or going through it at school or college. Maybe you've just clicked on this video because you're curious, and you're probably in the back of your mind thinking, Shakespeare's not all that important to me, so I'll just see the first 30 seconds and carry on. Well, if you have just clicked on this video out of curiosity, can I ask you not to hasten away or to be distracted and turned aside by some paltry bauble or promising glitter of falsehood? Because what I'm going to share with you in this video are just 3 tips on how to come to understand and enjoy reading Shakespeare. And one of those will be why read Shakespeare in the first place. So, if you're ready, come along with me for these 3 tips. Do you know what the main reasons are for people shying away from Shakespeare or not taking the time to get into Shakespeare? I'll put them on the screen. They are, his language is hard to understand. The second one is, I don't know what's going on when I'm reading his plays. And the third one is, why should I be interested in Shakespeare's works anyway? Surely I can just read whatever I'm interested in. Well, I'd like to take you through these 3 things and give answers to each of them to help anyone that is trying to get into Shakespeare to find the smoothest route in and find the joy and the passion for words which no one has managed to match ever since his day. The man was a genius. His way of conjuring up ideas, images, emotions, the whole experience of being a human being is unparalleled in literature. Now, I'm sure you'd agree that if that is true, he's worth investing a little bit of time in. So let's take up this first obstacle of Shakespeare's language is hard. Now, sometimes we might get the idea that because the language is a bit hard to understand, it's because he's some great philosopher, highbrow, cerebral character. He's not. He does use just words of the common person of his day. And let me explain to you how you can become familiar with his way of speaking quicker than you can imagine. I'll put it this way. Have you ever met someone who is on holiday in your country and they know your language? They've learned quite a lot of it. But when they talk to you, you can clearly see a difference between how much you know as a native and what they've learned. Also, they may carry an accent which is harder for you to understand. So maybe they've come for directions on something. To start with, what is the conversation like? Well, sometimes it's a bit awkward, a bit stop-start, as you say something to them which they try to understand but they can't quite get it. And they say something to you and you're thinking, no, I've got no idea what you mean by that. Because of course, even though they may know English or whatever language it is, or you may be speaking French, we think in our native language. And that causes us to arrange sentences and ideas in a particular way unique to our way of living. But as you keep talking, what do you find happens? You begin to even out and find a common ground. Sometimes you will borrow expressions that they're using because you know that that's what they'll understand. Alternatively, they may listen and then say, oh, excuse me, and repeat your word. And slowly you acclimatise to one another and you can have a full conversation. I once met a family from Germany and I've never met them before, and I invited them back to my house. My wife was a bit worried because she was like, well, what are we going to talk about? And some of them weren't that fluent, to be quite honest. You know, we had a great evening because we very quickly, as we had length of conversation, managed to tune into each other's way of talking. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is because Shakespeare is just the same. If you speak and read English, you're closer to knowing Shakespeare than you can imagine. He speaks English, but with a strong accent. And he has certain phrases common to his time, just like people in different regions of the world have phrases particular to their area, different idioms. The way to become familiar or to overcome the problem of the way Shakespeare writes and understanding his words is just to spend some time in his company. So here's what you need to do if you want to get into Shakespeare. Grab yourself one of Shakespeare's plays. This one here is Richard III. Now, a lot of Shakespeare plays that you can pick up have got lots of footnotes and annotations and explanations of the lines. What I want you to do, if you can find one like this, which is just like £1, then this has no annotations whatsoever. What I want you to do is just open it and read the play. Just read it like a book. Now, for sure, there'll be some lines you drop back on because you're thinking, I didn't understand that. But rather than puzzle over it, keep on reading. You will be surprised that you will take in at least 70% of what's being said, probably more. And you will understand the story and you will recognise the characters. And then you'll have completed a Shakespearean play. Now, you may know that you've missed some stuff. There may be certain scenes which are a little confusing, like Act 1, Scene 2 in this is a little bit difficult on your first run through, but the rest of the book is pretty straightforward, to be quite honest. So if you've got one of these, or perhaps you've gone out and got something like the Arden editions, which now these have got some great extensive annotations, what I want you to do if you have these books is exactly the same. Read it without reading the annotations. What you're doing is you're acclimatizing your ear to Shakespeare's accent. Whenever I've gone a long time without reading Shakespeare, when I go back to read a play, I will always read 2 plays straight through and then go to the one that I read. And by the time I get to the 3rd one, I'm thinking in his way of talking. I've adopted his way of expressing himself. And suddenly, we can speak the same language. So that's tip number 1. Just read one of Shakespeare's plays and then read another one afterwards and you'll find you've become familiar with his way of talking. Now, the second reason people can struggle with Shakespeare, or it might hold you back, is, yes, I feel like I understand the words, but I still don't know what's going on. I'm finding the plot hard to follow. Now, how do you deal with that? Because that can be quite disconcerting when you feel like all the words you know, but the meaning of them is lost on you and you just don't know what's happening. Well, there are 2 ways that you can deal with this problem. And with a little bit of practice, this problem will vanish in a quicker amount of time than you probably expect it to. And this is how you do it. The first way, go and watch the play. If you can't watch the whole play, go on YouTube. There's often you have the play out there somewhere in the ether. Or if not, there may be critical scenes or soliloquies or speeches that will be on YouTube or somewhere else on the internet. Just go and watch them, because a good actor, just by the way they express it in tone, will make you realise what's happening, especially if it's a repartee back and forth. The other way is to get information on the background of the play, especially, for instance, if it's a history. So Richard III, Henry IV, Henry V, Richard II, whoever it may be. Get a little bit of background of the story, and you can find this by just typing in the Shakespeare play synopsis on Wikipedia. And if there's any more history that you want, look for a video that gives you a little bit of a background. Now, for instance, I have got videos currently on Macbeth, Henry V, I've got a few on him, Richard II and Richard III. In each of those videos, before going through the speech, I'll give you background of what's just happened, so that you understand the context of the play or the speech that's being given. And just with that information, you're primed and ready to read and understand what he says. But more importantly, you'll be blown away by the majesty of what he is saying. Because when it's his histories, his kings that are talking, any nobles, wow. Shakespeare just has the most rich, unctuous language which makes you want to go out and learn poetry and write poetry for the rest of your life, kind of thing. So that's how you overcome the problem of, I don't know what's going on. Go on YouTube or somewhere else on the internet, watch it either being acted or watch a video on a bit being explained. And you'll think, oh, I get that. But not only will you get it, you'll be impressed by just how good it is what you're reading. So there we are. We know how to get past the language problem, and we know how to get meaning if we ever get stuck. The third point is the most important of them all if you want to get into Shakespeare. The ultimate reason that people shy away from Shakespeare or don't get into it, and may even be for yourself, even though you may think, well, I've wanted to get into Shakespeare, I just can't. The ultimate reason is this one. Why is it important to read Shakespeare anyway? Now, on the broadest sweep of that, how important is it to read Shakespeare? It's not, because not reading Shakespeare won't mean that you'll drop dead. You can live life very successfully without knowing Shakespeare. And others will say, I don't want to work when I'm reading. I read for relaxation. I only read what I like. That's why I read. That, I wouldn't say, is a great argument to not read Shakespeare. That's like saying, I like burgers. I like McDonald's, so I don't want to go to a Michelin restaurant. Well, if someone was paying for you to go to the best restaurant in the world, would you want to go? Or would you say, well, because I haven't had that before, I'll stick with a Happy Meal? You wouldn't say it. And if we kept that attitude through our whole life, we'd still be reading Peter and Jane books. This is Peter, this is Jane. Because hardly any child at that point finds reading easy. They're learning. But why do we push them? Because we know that as their horizons grow with their reading, there's so much more available to them. Now, Shakespeare has something very, almost unique amongst all writers. In the eminent critic, literature critic, Harold Bloom, wrote a book about Shakespeare. He's wrote a few, but he epitomised why Shakespeare is so great when he named the book The Invention of the Human. You see, Shakespeare, better than anyone else, gets you to explore yourself. You learn your own emotions, your own tangled knots of stresses, of desires, of ill feeling, of aspirations, of love, of envy. We all have these. What Shakespeare's works do, if you're not aware, is they bring them bubbling up so that we can feel them, sense them, but hold them in our hand, non-judgmentally, strangely enough, and just look at them and then put them back inside ourselves, and you feel you've learned something about you. Something about Shakespeare's characters, because remember, in a play, when you read it on paper, there's no narrative. Everything must be expressed purely by words. Now, how do you move people like that? Well, Shakespeare was a master. He uses rhetoric and rhythm and form and style, and he uses it so exceptionally well that it has a zinging influence on your nerves. You prickle, and you can't tell why you're feeling so energized or excited until you begin to analyze it more deeply. But just being able to read and understand Shakespeare will light you up. It will literally, and not many times can this actually be held true, this will literally change your enjoyment in life. You will find something beautiful, priceless, just ornamented in gold if you take the time to get to know Shakespeare. I'll give you some examples of that. You see, most of Shakespeare's plays, there's nothing new about the stories. You know, boy meets girl, girl meets boy, whatever it may be. Love and hate and jealousy and strife and envy and travelling abroad to do something and being down on your luck. All of these things are in Shakespeare's plays, and they're in every film out there. But Shakespeare brings it to life more forcefully because he is so equipped with the tools to do it, and such a great artist in what he does. Remember, he is in the Renaissance. The Renaissance was the time period in history where topics of study were being formed by a form, understanding sculpture by a form, art, music, finding the patterns and the rhythms, the standardization of things, getting down to the real principles that make philosophy work, that make the sciences work, because that was born really at the beginning of the Renaissance. People of the day, their minds were very, very well attuned to understanding, to perceiving within something. Not just how this fits this, but why it works. And Shakespeare's in that time and has that kind of mind. If you want to really reach somebody and move them and stir them to act, how do you go about it? Well, some people might say, use some energy, get enthusiastic. And you'll notice this in a lot of arguments, won't you? That people, rather than actually making a good argument, they just get energetic about it. And if they bang their fist enough and shout over the opposition, they think they've won an argument. Well, they haven't. So how do you reach a person? How do you really stimulate somebody who's listening to you? How could I do it? Well, I would speak to you in the common tongue, in a form and shade of greatness and power, if I could. A rhythm that flows naturally to your heart and mind. That's how to stir someone, isn't it? Now, I don't know if you know this, but what I just said was a rough form of iambic pentameter. All the previous lines. And there was something about it that as you were listening, you would have gone, yeah, I can agree with that. Because iambic pentameter has a rhythm which we accept as everyday speech, and we immediately adopt it as our own. Now that's brilliant. Now what's the one thing you learned about Shakespeare at school and the way he wrote? He wrote in iambic pentameter. Now, he didn't write every line in iambic pentameter, that's not true. But in his great speeches, and in his most stirring and visceral moments, you will find, especially all the nobles and the main characters, will speak in iambic pentameter. And this is why. Because unlike modern writing, even some of the great poets today, Shakespeare doesn't get you to identify with the character. He makes you become the character. When you listen to Shakespeare's words delivered on stage, mightily, or when you're reading the play, you read them out loud, you will find that those words, you've become them. You will listen to it and you will want to get up and act it because it goes so deep to who you are. It literally pulls up parts of you and you can't resist that power. You have to adopt those words. Now, isn't that worth spending the time getting to know? How much colour would you add to your own thinking if you could experience the beauty of language used by a master? That's the reason to read Shakespeare. Now I'm going to give you an example from Shakespeare of how that can be done. From Romeo and Juliet, because it's like the most famous. Now, where's my book? Do you remember that scene? Romeo likes Juliet and he creeps into her garden and she comes out on the balcony. And she says the famous words, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Refuse thy father, deny thy name. Or if thou wilt not, be sworn to my love, and I'll no longer be called a Capulet." Now, I've read that with like no grace and no animation at all. But the words, what she's saying, she's basically saying, Romeo, we've got these two families, my family and your family hate each other, and oh, Romeo, if you could just, leave your family, then we could be together. Now imagine that on a show today, on a film. You can imagine them saying, come on, let's just, screw the family, we love each other, let's just run away together, we're enough for each other. Now that's energy and emotion, yes. But what Shakespeare does with Juliet there is something far more powerful. And on the face of it, you might not think it is, but let's just take this through. Because what he's getting us to do is not just understand Juliet's love. What he's getting us to do, he's putting the words to the emotions. Often we know emotions, but putting words to them is a different thing. People say, no one speaks like that. Do you know what? Even in Shakespeare's day, they didn't necessarily speak like this. They didn't go around talking in iambic pentameter. But I tell you what is true. We all feel and think like that and wish we could get those thoughts into words. So let's just look at it again. O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? Okay, wherefore and art, old words, but where are you, Romeo? Now 3 times she uses the word Romeo. Now yes, you could in a story or in a film just say, oh, come on Romeo, we need to do this. But this use of rhetoric, Romeo, 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 isn't that really how you feel in yourself when you're yearning after someone? It's not just their name. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? She loves the name. He has possessed her mind. He is everything to her. And we get this sense of that coming up in us. And then she says, deny thy father and refuse thy name. Now, you could say, let's give our family the heave-ho. But the rhythm, deny thy father, refuse thy name, okay, is matching our heartbeat. Du-dum, du-dum, du-dum. And we're not conscious of it, but this rhythm cuts straight into us, which is why it's better than saying, well, let's, say good so long to the family and just go. No. It also touches an emotional aspect because she doesn't say leave your family. She says deny thy father. Who is the father? The head of the house in these days. The person that people look up to. As a child, you've got a mum and a dad. If either of them raise their voice, who's the most scary? It's normally the dad for a child because there's more power in the voice or a depth. So when she says, deny thy father, the person that you should be imitating, Romeo, refuse thy name. Now what's name? Name is honour. They're giving me a bad name. Honour. Strip off your honour, Romeo, in order to love me. That's what she wants. And then she says, or if thou wilt not, so if you won't, be but sworn to my love. Now, isn't that beautiful? She doesn't just say, look, if you can't leave your father, as long as I know you love me, I'll follow you and I'll quit my family. Well, yeah, that's what she's saying. But in her mind, in her heart, what does she want? Does she just want him to say, I love you? No, she says, be but sworn to my love. Oh yeah, that's how I feel, really. Actually, when I love someone, yeah, I want them to be sworn to me. And then she says, and I'll no longer be a Capulet. So she's from the Capulet family. She's saying, if you are sworn to my love, if I know you love me that deeply, that nothing can break us, then I will get rid of my family for you. Now, how powerful is that? As you hear these words, especially when they're acted, or if you can act them in your head when you're reading, you become Juliet. Or should I say, Juliet becomes you. She will take over you. Because the rhythm in which it's given and the mastery in rhetoric, which is an art form which should be taught today but isn't, we can't resist it. It's the way we work. And Shakespeare handled it like no one else. But let's just carry on a little bit more with Juliet's speech, because she just gives voice to some beautiful images and feelings that we all recognise. This is why when people say Shakespeare is not relevant today, phooey, of course he is. Do girls and boys still love each other today? Do we feel ardently entangled with somebody else's soul? Yes, we do. And because it's in a play form, you don't even have to be back in the 16th century. She's standing on a balcony. That could be a balcony anywhere. It could be a balcony at a motel. But the feelings are identical. It's the way Shakespeare, unlike anyone else, can get them straight out of ourselves, as if we were coming up with the words. So let's just listen to what she says. She says, "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy." So she's asked him to leave his family, hasn't she? Because it's just your name that's my enemy, nothing else. "Thou art thyself, though, not a Montague." What's Montague? This surname. What is a name? Do you see what Shakespeare's doing? Instead of just saying, "I really fancy you," he's taking the thoughts, the whole stream of consciousness, the whole churn and roiling of emotions, and he's managing to put words to it. Words which for centuries people have tried to put into their own mouths when they're trying to tell someone how much they love them, or trying to go over the tortures of their mind and indecision and doubt. He's finding words in a rhythm that draws them out of you as if they're your own. And she says, what's Montague? What is a Montague? It's nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to man. Montague isn't a thigh. It's not your actual hand. It's just a name. All humans have hands and knees and feet and eyes and nose and ears. And she's saying to herself, why get tangled up on the name just because that family and my family fight? And then she says something, and I don't know if you're aware that this is where the phrase comes from. She says, "Oh, be some other name. You'll still be the same person. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." Do you recognise that quote? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Isn't that true? If the rose was called a buddleia, it would still smell like a rose. What's she saying? She has this inner turmoil. She's saying, Romeo, give up your name. What is a name? It alters not one iota of your physical makeup. A rose doesn't smell like it does because it is called a rose. Give it any other name, it is still the same plant. You are my love, not your name. I shouldn't be held from you because I am Capulet. It is just a name. Do you love me like I love you? Will you be sworn to me? If so, then both of us may deny our father and refuse our names. Now, do you see what Shakespeare has done there? He's taken the idea of love, the worry that you're going to be torn from somebody just because your families are feuding, and he's put it in such a way that you adopt it. You don't read it as if Romeo and Juliet are someone else speaking. You begin to read it as if they have become you, and you are thinking their very thoughts. One of the greatest expressions I've heard about Shakespeare and his writings is that he gives us inwardness. Now, this is a beautiful idea. He doesn't get us to observe out there and draw conclusions. His characters make us turn inside ourselves, inward, and they grab hold of every emotion they want us to feel. And they don't do it in some clever, sly way. It's just raw honesty given through the most majestic, well-balanced and harmonious words you'll ever read. And now I hope you realise why you should read Shakespeare. Do you want that? Does he sound now, if he can do those things, does he sound like someone that actually I would like to understand that? I'm prepared to put in a little bit of effort if those are the riches that I'll receive. So, you want to get into Shakespeare? Take those 3 tips. First, just read a play straight through or listen to the play read by someone else. And don't worry yourself about understanding every word. Just get acclimatized to Shakespeare's accent, as it were, and you'll soon be able to understand him. The second one, get some background context from a video on YouTube. By all means, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell, because I'm going to next week do a line-by-line explanation of a speech in Richard II. And what you will find amazing about this speech is probably even without my help, you'll understand all of it. And that might come as a surprise to a lot of you. Okay, but it's also a glorious speech. So hit the notification bell and make sure you don't miss that. So get some background information, or if there's a particular scene you don't understand, just go and watch it acted on a video somewhere on the internet. And then third of all, remember why Shakespeare is at least worth your time. He comes from a time period where an understanding of how humans react to things was pretty much the obsession of the day. And all the great thinkers of the day were geared to working out the inner workings of how everything was. Not just how to link one thing to another, but why things are so. Why are things beautiful? And you think of the classical arts, and all our great buildings come from that time period. Okay, because they were attuned to trying to crystallize the most important principles around us. And also because he, unlike anyone else, manages to get his characters to possess you, or even one step further, turn you into the character themselves and feel exactly as they are, and feel the emotions that are in you in a way deeper than you've ever felt them before, with a clarity of understanding yourself which no one else has really matched. And that's the only reason why Shakespeare has lasted. It's not because people just want someone to cling on to. He's lasted because he has spoke to every single generation since him in a way that touches them deep to the heart. Now name another person that's done that. Nobody. So remember why Shakespeare is important and worth your time, and that will give you the motivation to get over a few bumps and hurdles. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've got something out of it and feel it's beneficial. Can I ask you to share this on Facebook, especially with anyone you know who is homeschooling, or anyone who's got youngsters going to school and doing Shakespeare, because this will help them. But this is what I want most of all from you all. If you want to get into Shakespeare, what are the difficulties specifically that you find you face? If you were to go on a course as an introduction to Shakespeare, what would you be hoping to get out of it? And the reason I say this is over the next coming months, I am going to try and put together an introduction to Shakespeare course so that anyone can begin to get enjoyment out of Shakespeare with as little effort as possible. There'll be some effort, but to really enjoy the majesty of his writing and his works. So what would you like in a course? And leave your comments down below. And if you've got lots of ideas, leave all of them down below and help me out, because I don't want to make something that's good for me but not for those listening. So thank you ever so much for listening to this video, and until the next time, I wish you joy in your reading.